I want you to take a moment and just imagine your absolute favorite vanilla ice cream.
Oh, yeah, that's easy.
Right. Like, picture that perfect creamy scoop melting just slightly around the edges. Or, if you prefer, imagine a warm chocolate chip cookie, right, fresh out of the oven.
With the steam still rising off the chocolate.
Exactly. You take a bite, you taste that warm, sweet, incredibly comforting flavor, and, well, it feels so basic.
It really does. It's everywhere.
It is so ubiquitous that we literally use the word vanilla to describe things that are plain or ordinary or, unexciting. We use it as a synonym for the default option.
The boring option, basically.
Right. But I need you to prepare yourself because the reality behind that single flavor profile is, well, it is anything but plain.
It is arguably one of the most phenomenal contradictions in the modern culinary world. I mean, the flavor that we associate with the mundane, the everyday, the baseline, is actually derived from one of the most demanding, finicky, and scientifically complex agricultural processes on the face of the planet.
And outrageously expensive, too.
Oh, incredibly expensive.
We have a massive stack of sources for this deep dive today, and the breadth of the literature is just staggering. We are looking at historical profiles from botanical gardens detailing centuries-old agricultural techniques.
We also have access to hardcore, incredibly detailed financial models built for modern agricultural startups.
Yeah, and we are diving into cutting-edge metabolomic studies from Leiden University in the Netherlands. Plus, we've got practical, boots-on-the-ground agronomy guides from places like Madagascar and French Polynesia.
It is a truly diverse set of literature. I mean, we are crossing the boundaries of evolutionary botany, advanced organic chemistry, colonial human history, and high-stakes finance.
All to understand a single ingredient.
All for vanilla.
And our mission today is to take all of those disparate fields and synthesize them for you. We are going to unpack how a fragile, impossibly demanding tropical orchid vine manages to become the world's most popular flavor.
We're exploring the intense biology of the plant, the history of how humans learned to manipulate it, the intense chemical crucible required to unlock its flavor,
And the absolutely shocking economics that keep the entire industry on a knife's edge. Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can actually taste vanilla, we have to understand how to grow it.
right, which is a whole ordeal in itself.
Okay.
It-
As it turns out, our sources make it abundantly clear that vanilla is the absolute diva of the plant kingdom.
Diva is biologically accurate here. Vanilla comes from the orchid family, specifically a species known as Vanilla planifolia. And to understand why it's so difficult to cultivate, you really have to look at its evolutionary architecture.
Meaning how it physically grows in the wild.
Exactly. Because unlike an apple tree or a blueberry bush that just, builds a woody trunk and stands on its own, Vanilla planifolia is a climbing vine. But it doesn't just crawl along the ground.
No, it needs help.
Right. In its natural habitat, it requires what agronomy experts call tutors.
Tutors, like a teacher.
Well, in this context, they're living host trees. It needs a very specific type of bark to cling to, allowing its aerial roots to anchor it as it climbs upward toward the jungle canopy in search of sunlight.
But it doesn't just need a tree to climb. It needs the surrounding environment to be curated to a level of precision that is, frankly, difficult to comprehend for an agricultural crop.
It's absurdly specific.
The agronomy guides in our stack lay this out in excruciating detail. This plant demands an ambient temperature between 21 degrees and 32 degrees Celsius.
And it requires an incredibly specific rainfall pattern, too.
Right, between 1,500 and 3,000 millimeters. But that rain has to be evenly distributed. You can't just dump it all at once.
Oh, no, that would ruin it. And it demands 80 to 90% ambient humidity at almost all times.
But the kicker, the thing that makes it so maddening to grow, is the lighting. It requires dappled or filtered shade.
Dappled shade is key, because if you plant it in full sun, the leaves scorch and the plant dies.
And if you put in thick, heavy shade,
it refuses to flower and eventually just rots. It's incredibly dramatic.
it really is. If it gets a torrential downpour outside of its natural cycle, the roots drown. If the humidity drops to 60%, the microscopic pores on the leaves close up in a panic.
And then the flowers wither, and the plant essentially shuts down entirely.
To put that microscopic window of tolerance into perspective, let's compare vanilla to other major tropical crops that thrive in similar geographic belts. Like, think about the bananas you buy at the grocery store.
Right, bananas are basically agricultural tanks.
Exactly. You can grow them in blazing, full, unfiltered sun, and they can tolerate a massive swing in temperature. They easily push up to 35 degrees Celsius without catastrophic failure.
And cocoa, which gives us chocolate, Can handle periods of 100% humidity.
Yeah, and it can thrive in partial to full sun depending on the variety. Arabica coffee prefers much cooler environments, usually between 15 and 24 degrees Celsius, and often loves direct sunlight.
But vanilla refuses to compromise. It is uniquely vulnerable because it evolved in a highly specialized ecological niche.
The understory of the Mesoamerican rainforest.
Yes, where the canopy perfectly filtered the harsh sun and the dense jungle trapped a constant vaporous humidity.
Which perfectly explains why the island nation of Madagascar is globally famous for producing the highest quality vanilla.
Right, it's a perfect match.
The agronomy sources specifically highlight Madagascar's Sava region, which encompasses coastal and inland areas like Sambava, Antalya, Vohemar, and Andapa.
They refer to this specific geographical pocket as the gold standard of vanilla cultivation.
And that is purely due to the climatic lottery, right? Because Madagascar is not the only place vanilla is cultivated today.
Oh, definitely not. You have massive operations in Indonesia, growing operations in India, its native home in Mexico, and high-altitude farms in Papua New Guinea.
But the Sava region is special.
It is, because its natural, unengineered climate perfectly aligns with the vanilla plant's rigid seasonal demands. The trade winds off the Indian Ocean create a microclimate where the temperature rarely drops below that crucial 20 degrees Celsius floor.
And it almost never spikes above the 32-degree ceiling.
Exactly. The rainfall is beautifully distributed throughout the calendar year, keeping the soil moisture stable without drowning the root systems. And the ambient coastal humidity stays naturally locked in that 80 to 90% sweet spot.
But reading through these agronomy guides, it becomes obvious that even if you possess a plot of land in the perfect microclimate of the Sava region, you can't just throw seeds in the dirt and wait.
No, not at all.
The farmers have to manage the physical planting of the vines with a level of mathematical precision that reads more like civil engineering than farming. Like, the land preparation guidelines don't talk about plowing fields, they talk about architectural geometry.
It is highly regimented because, well, the margin for error is essentially zero. Depending on the existing state of the land a farmer is starting with, the entire geometry of the plantation shifts.
So let's look at the instructions for planting in an existing primary forest, where the native canopy trees are massive, exceeding 10 meters in height.
Right. The farmer cannot simply clear-cut the forest. They have to selectively prune the canopy high above to engineer exactly 50% light penetration and 50% ventilation.
And once the light is mathematically perfect, they introduce 5,000 Tudor trees per hectare.
Wait, 5,000 trees just for scaffolding.
Just for scaffolding. But they don't scatter them. They are planted in heavily calculated double rows. The guides mandate a row of Tudors, followed by a precise 1-meter gap.
Then a second row of Tudors, followed by a 2-meter gap.
Then a 1-meter gap, and so on. Let me stop you there, because my immediate question when reading that was, why the alternating 1-meter and 2-meter gaps? Why not just space them evenly?
Yeah, that seems like it would be easier.
Right. But the sources explain that it is entirely about controlling airflow and human access. The 1-meter gap provides just enough proximity for the vines to benefit from shared humidity.
While the 2-meter gap creates a ventilation corridor to prevent fungal diseases from sweeping through the damp undergrowth.
Exactly. And it gives the farmer a physical lane to work in.
Precisely. The geometry is a defense mechanism against the environment, and the math changes drastically if the land isn't a primary forest.
What about secondary vegetation?
Right, meaning the large trees are gone and it is mostly dense, shrubby bushland. If that's the case, they must clear the site completely. They turn all the dried branches into a specific grade of mulch.
And then they have to plant bushes.
Yes, they must select and cultivate specific species of bushes to act as tutors. These bushes must have a single primary stem, absolutely no lower branches near the ground to prevent crawling pests.
And they must be maintained at exactly 1.7 meters tall.
Yep. In the secondary environment, the density increases to 6,600 tutors per acre.
And if a farmer is starting with entirely deforested land, a completely blank slate,
then the guides demand 10,000 tutors per hectare, planted in a strict, unrelenting 1-meter by 1-meter grid.
it's an overwhelming amount of labor just to set up the scaffolding. But then you get to the section on the root systems, and the level of care borders on the absurd.
It really does, because unlike a potato or a carrot, where the roots plunge deep into the earth.
Where you can just walk all over the soil above them without a second thought.
Exactly. The vanilla root system is terrifyingly fragile. The root architecture of vanilla planifolia is highly unusual.
How so?
Well, the roots are fleshy, shallow, and they lack the robust microscopic root hairs that many other plants use to aggressively force their way through compact soil. They do not dig deep.
They just sort of sprawl out horizontally, right?
Yes, just barely under the surface of the leaf litter. The agronomy guides place an immense emphasis on the fact that these roots cannot endure physical compression.
You can't step on them.
If a farmer steps on the soil above a vanilla root during routine weeding or pest management, the compression crushes the fleshy root tissue. This severs the plant's nutrient supply and often introduces fatal rot.
So to solve this, the farmers are forced to build massive, elevated beds of decaying organic matter above the natural soil line, just to house and protect the roots.
They lay down this highly specific decomposing organic mulch, and it must be exactly 30 centimeters thick.
But even the physical dimensions of these mulch blocks are strictly regulated by the slope of the topography. If the plantation is in a perfectly flat forest, the mulch blocks must be 4 meters long by exactly 50 centimeters wide.
And if the plantation is on any sort of gradient or slope,
Then the blocks must be narrowed to 4 meters by 40 centimeters. In the secondary vegetation setups, they're expanded to 4 meters by 1 meter.
and between every single one of these raised beds, the farmer must maintain a pristine, 1 meter wide, clean trail.
This trail exists for one reason, so the human workers can walk through the plantation without their boots ever coming near the root zones.
Furthermore, if the farm is on a hillside, the guides dictate that the walking trails must be constructed in a zigzag pattern.
Because if they were straight, heavy tropical rainwater would channel down the paths, build up velocity, overflow into the raised beds.
And literally wash the fragile roots right out of their mulch. It is, at its core, a form of agricultural choreography.
That's a great way to put it.
Every single footstep a farmer takes, every branch they prune, every centimeter of mulch they lay down is pre-calculated to protect an organism that seems actively determined to perish if conditions are anything less than perfect.
Which brings me to an analogy I couldn't shake while going through these sources. The vanilla orchid is essentially a highly demanding pop star on a world tour.
Absolutely.
It shows up to the venue, and its tour rider demands a dressing room kept at exactly 72 degrees. The ambient humidity must be precisely 85%.
The lighting cannot be too bright, lest it ruin the mood, but it can't be too dim. It requires a perfectly dappled aesthetic glow.
And the most strict rule of all, absolutely nobody is allowed to look at, touch, or step anywhere near its feet.
No stepping on the roots.
But if you take a step back from the sheer ridiculousness of these agricultural demands, a major evolutionary question emerges. If this plant is so incredibly fragile, if its root system is so weak that a single footstep can kill it,
And if it is geographically limited to highly specific bands of humidity and filtered light.
exactly.
Yeah.
How did it ever survive in the wild? I mean, millions of years of evolution usually weed out organisms this delicate. How did this fragile vine not only survive the brutal reality of the Mesoamerican jungle, but eventually become a global commodity?
What's fascinating here is that we have to look at the plant's evolutionary strategy. In its native undisturbed habitat, vanilla planifolia never had to be a global commodity.
It wasn't trying to take over the world.
Right. It didn't evolve to survive in diverse environments across the globe. It evolved to exploit one highly specific, incredibly exclusive ecological niche.
So it partnered up.
It survived by developing biological partnerships that were so specialized, they essentially locked the plant into the Mesoamerican rainforest.
And that biological lock introduces the single most difficult requirement of vanilla cultivation. Because you can follow the agronomy guides perfectly, you can build the exact 1 meter by 1 meter grid of tutors.
You can perfectly curate the 50% dappled shade canopy.
You can construct the 30-centimeter mulch beds, and you can spend a decade never once stepping on its roots. And the plant will grow into a massive, healthy, beautiful green vine.
But it still won't give you a single vanilla bean.
The plant absolutely refuses to reproduce and bear fruit without a highly specific biological trigger.
Yes. This is where the botany intersects with entomology. In the wild, primarily in the dense jungles of Mexico and Central America, the vanilla orchid is naturally pollinated by one specific genus of insect.
The Melipona bee.
The Melipona bee.
Just one specific type of bee out of the thousands of species on the planet.
Just one. And to understand why it requires the Melipona bee, we have to look closely at the internal anatomy of the vanilla blossom.
Okay, let's look inside the flower.
Most flowers on Earth want to be pollinated. They are designed to make it as easy as possible for wind or insects to move pollen from the male part of the flower to the female part. But orchids are complex.
Very complex.
The vanilla flower is a hermaphrodite. It contains both the male organ, the anther, which holds the pollen, and the female organ, the stigma. However, evolutionary biology dictates that self-fertilization is dangerous.
Right, because if a plant pollinates itself, it creates a genetic clone.
Exactly, which reduces genetic diversity and makes the entire species vulnerable to disease. To prevent this, the vanilla orchid evolved a physical barrier. The male and female parts are separated by a small, fleshy, impermeable membrane known as the rostellum.
So the plant has intentionally built a wall inside its own flower to stop the pollen from dropping onto the stigma.
Exactly. The rostellum acts as a locked door. The flower requires an outside agent to come in, physically bypass that door, pick up the pollen, and carry it to a completely different flower on a different vine.
And that's where the bee comes in.
The Melipona bee is the only insect in that native ecosystem, perfectly sized, shaped, and heavy enough to crawl deep into the tubular vanilla flower.
Wow.
As it forces its way in to gather nectar, its thorax pushes against the rostellum, lifting it up and out of the way. As the bee backs out, the sticky pollen smears onto its back.
And then it flies to the next flower.
When it visits the next flower, the process repeats, but this time, the pollen on its back is deposited directly onto the receptive stigma.
The mechanics of that are brilliant from an evolutionary standpoint.
Yeah.
But, it presents a massive world-altering problem for agriculture.
Oh, huge problem.
Because, as we discussed, vanilla is grown all over the world today. It is a massive industry in Madagascar, in Indonesia, in Tahiti, and none of those places have the Melipona bee.
They do not. When European explorers and botanists first discovered vanilla in Mexico, they were captivated by the flavor. They took vine cuttings and transported them across the oceans to various tropical colonies with similar climates.
And the vines grew, right?
The vines grew beautifully. They thrived in the heat and humidity of places like the Indian Ocean islands. They produced lush leaves and gorgeous ephemeral flowers.
But no beans.
They never produced a single pod. For decades, the global expansion of vanilla was completely halted because outside of Mesoamerica, natural pollination simply does not happen.
And that is where the human element enters the story and becomes the ultimate bottleneck. Every single vanilla bean you have ever consumed in your entire life that was grown outside of its native range in the Americas was pollinated by a human hand.
Manually. Every single one.
And the logistical window to perform this manual pollination is nothing short of terrifying.
It's incredibly stressful.
The agronomy sources detail the life cycle of the flower, and it is brutally brief. A vanilla blossom opens early in the morning, and it only stays viable for a single day.
You essentially have a 12-hour window.
The flower opens at dawn, and by late afternoon, it begins to wither. If it is not pollinated within that microscopic time frame, it drops off the vine, and that potential pod is gone forever.
Furthermore, the weather dictates everything.
Right. If a farmer wakes up in the morning, a cluster of flowers opens, and it happens to be raining, the day is ruined. Rainwater washes the delicate pollen away, making fertilization impossible and destroying the chance of fruit formation.
So you have a strict 12-hour clock entirely dependent on clear weather.
And to yield just 1 kilogram of cured vanilla beans, a farmer must successfully hand-pollinate over 600 individual blossoms.
It is an almost unimaginable amount of manual precision labor. But the profound truth is that the only reason this industry exists, the only reason we possess the knowledge to bypass the rostellum without destroying the flower, is because of a historical breakthrough that occurred in the 1840s.
This was the most striking historical detail buried in the Botanical Garden archives. The sophisticated technique for hand-pollinating the vanilla orchid was not invented by a university-educated European botanist.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't cracked by a wealthy plantation owner with access to the era's cutting-edge science. The puzzle was solved by a 12-year-old enslaved boy named Edmund Albius.
The history is as remarkable as it is sobering. The year was 1841. Edmund Albius was living on a plantation on the island of Reunion, which was a French colony situated in the Indian Ocean, not far from Madagascar.
Where they had been trying to grow it for years.
For years, wealthy French planters had been cultivating vanilla vines on the island. The climate was ideal and the vines were massive, but they were barren.
Because there was no bee.
The Melipona bee did not exist on Reunion. European botanists had spent years trying to formulate a method for artificial pollination. Some attempted to use complex tools, others tried to manually squeeze the flowers.
Did any of that work?
A few succeeded occasionally, but the methods were incredibly slow, clumsy, and often destroyed the delicate floral tissue, making commercial-scale farming impossible.
And then Edmund Albius, a 12-year-old child with no formal botanical training but possessing an incredible capacity for observation and mechanical understanding, steps up and completely picks the lock of the vanilla orchid.
He fundamentally understood the anatomy of the flower. Albius realized that the rostellum was the sole barrier preventing fertilization.
So he just needed to move it.
Through trial and observation, he discovered that he could use a very simple tool, a thin, pointed stick of bamboo, or even a stiff blade of grass.
The blade of grass.
Yes. He used the stick to gently pry the fleshy rostellum up and fold it out of the way. Then, using the thumb of his other hand, he applied gentle pressure to the flower, physically pressing the anther down so that the pollen smeared directly onto the sticky surface of the stigma.
It was an incredibly fast, elegant, and perfectly efficient solution. He bypassed millions of years of evolutionary defense mechanisms with a blade of grass and a thumb.
It's astounding.
And the impact of his discovery was instantaneous and world-changing. Because of this 12-year-old child, the island of Reunion transformed almost overnight into the world's largest supplier of vanilla at the time.
The local planters adopted his method immediately.
They scaled their operations, the vines finally bore heavy fruit, and the planters prospered massively, building generational fortunes off the ingenuity of a single boy.
Which brings us to the tragic reality of the historical record. Edmund Albius's intellectual breakthrough revolutionized a global agricultural industry and created immense wealth.
But he didn't see any of it.
Because he was enslaved under French colonial law, he was legally considered property. He received absolutely no financial compensation, no patents, and no royalties from the wealth he single-handedly generated for the plantation owners.
That's just heartbreaking.
While slavery was eventually abolished in the French colonies in 1848, granting Albius his freedom, he lived the remainder of his life in poverty. He never received widespread, formal recognition or financial stability during his lifetime for giving the world its most ubiquitous flavor.
It is a staggering legacy.
Yeah.
And what makes it even more profound is reading the modern agronomy guides from Madagascar today. Our sources explicitly state that farmers in 2026 are still using his exact technique.
It has not been automated.
It has not been improved upon by robotics or modern tools. In nearly 200 years, no one has found a better way to do it. Just think about the sheer crushing pressure on a vanilla farmer today.
Oh, the pressure is immense.
You are standing in the sweltering heat of the Sava region. You have a 12-hour window before the flowers die. You are frantically moving from vine to vine, using a tiny bamboo stick to lift the rostellum and press the pollen with your thumb, repeating this delicate microscopic surgery 600 times just to secure 1 kilo of future product.
And the entire time, you are staring at the sky, terrified that a sudden morning rainstorm could wash away the pollen and ruin your entire financial year.
This raises an important question, though, because as complex and stressful as the pollination window is, successfully fertilizing the flower is merely the end of the first chapter.
Right, the physical manipulation of the flower guarantees you a pod, but it guarantees you absolutely no flavor.
What actually happens inside that pod once the pollination is successful? Because if a farmer harvests that hard-won pod and you bite into it, you are going to be deeply confused.
Oh, without a doubt. If Edmund Albius's technique is executed perfectly, the flower closes up, eventually drops off, and a long, slender green pod begins to emerge from the vine.
Yeah, it takes a while to grow, right?
It takes an agonizing 9 to 10 months for that pollinated bean just to reach physical maturity. But if you were to walk into a plantation, snap a fresh, mature green vanilla pod right off the vine, slice it open and smell it, you would detect zero vanilla aroma.
Not at all.
If you tasted it, it would have absolutely no vanilla flavor. None whatsoever. It tastes remarkably like a bitter, astringent green bean. The signature flavor compounds simply do not exist in a perceptible state in the living plant.
To understand the mechanism of how we actually get the flavor, we have to transition away from botany and historical agriculture and dive headfirst into some extremely intense organic chemistry.
Let's do it.
This is where the fascinating metabolomic study from Leiden University in the Netherlands comes in. The researchers there wanted to understand the invisible chemical timeline of the pod.
Right, what's happening on molecular level over those 9 months?
To do this, they used a highly advanced analytical technique called 1H nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. We will just call it NMR for short. They use NMR to map the exact metabolic changes happening inside the living vanilla pod from month 3 of its growth all the way to month 8.
NMR spectroscopy is an incredibly powerful tool in modern chemistry. To understand how it works without getting bogged down in quantum physics, think of it somewhat like a highly specialized MRI machine.
Like when you get a scan at the hospital.
Yes, but instead of scanning a human body for tumors, it scans a liquid sample to identify molecular structures. It places the vanilla extract sample inside a massive supercooled magnet.
Okay, so it uses magnets.
This powerful magnetic field forces the nuclei of the hydrogen atoms, the protons, to align. The machine then hits the sample with a pulse of radio waves, which knocks the protons out of alignment. As they relax back into their magnetic state, they emit a faint radio frequency signal.
And different chemicals give off different signals.
Exactly. Because every chemical compound has a unique structure, the protons in a sugar molecule resonate at a slightly different frequency than the protons in an acid. The NMR machine reads these frequencies and produces a highly detailed graph.
Essentially giving the scientists a comprehensive, non-destructive chemical snapshot of every single metabolite present in the pod at that exact moment in time.
It's like taking a molecular fingerprint of the pod as it ages.
So the researchers at Leiden are taking these chemical snapshots of the green vanilla pods as they hang on the vine. And the data revealed a fascinating progression. In the young pods, the ones that have been growing for about 3 to 5 months, the NMR scans show they are heavily saturated with basic energy compounds.
They are full of glucose, malic acid, and 2 very specific compounds that the researchers labeled as glucoside A and glucoside B.
The presence of those glucosides is the key. As the researchers continued to scan the pods into their older phases, moving into the 6 to 8 month window, the metabolic profile completely shifted.
The basic glucose levels started dropping significantly, and the sucrose levels rose.
But more importantly, the plant's metabolism began synthesizing and accumulating complex phenolic compounds, most notably bihydroxybenzaldehyde.
And a highly crucial heavy molecule known as glucovanillin.
Glucovanillin. That immediately sounds like we're getting much closer to the flavor we actually want.
It is the biological precursor to the flavor, but it is vital to understand that glucovanillin itself is flavorless.
Wait, really? It has vanilla right in the name.
I know. This brings us to why plants create glucosides in the first place. Many of the complex chemical compounds plants produce, whether for defense against insects or as metabolic byproducts, can be highly reactive or even toxic to the plant's own cellular structure if left free-floating.
So they have to lock them up.
To protect itself, the vanilla orchid essentially builds a chemical safe around the volatile compound. It takes the reactive flavor molecule and chemically binds it to a stable, inert sugar molecule.
And that combination is the glucoside.
That resulting combination is a glucoside. The plant is meticulously manufacturing and storing massive amounts of potential vanilla flavor, but it is keeping it locked in a stable, water-soluble, flavorless state inside the green pod.
That chemical mechanism is brilliant. But while I was reading through the Leiden study, the NMR data from the young green pods revealed something else that completely stopped me in my tracks.
The homocitric acid.
Yes. Amidst all the glucose and the glucosides, the researchers found unexpectedly high concentrations of a molecule called homocitric acid. And from a botanical perspective, that shouldn't be there.
It really shouldn't.
If homocitric acid is heavily present in a plant, that implies a massive break in the normal rules of how plants survive.
Yeah.
You're telling me this delicate orchid is hiding a massive biological secret underground?
Yes, I was thrilled to see the researchers isolate this in the data. Because homocitric acid is a profound marker. It is a molecule that is extremely uncommon in the plant kingdom. Its primary biological function is to act as an intermediate in the biosynthesis of lysine, an essential amino acid.
But that specific biosynthetic pathway is primarily utilized by fungi.
Exactly, by fungi.
So we have an orchid vine growing high in the jungle canopy, and its seed pods are full of a chemical signature that belongs to mushrooms. What is a fungal chemical doing inside a vanilla pod?
This is where the biology of the orchid reveals its true complexity. The high concentration of homocitric acid strongly suggests and corroborates other botanical theories that vanilla planifolia is not a standard plant. It is what biologists call a mixotroph.
Mixotroph. Breaking that down, it means an organism that mixes its trophic levels. It mixes how it acquires its food and energy.
Precisely. To provide context, most plants you see outside your window are autotrophs. They're self-sustaining.
They just use the sun.
Right. They pull carbon dioxide from the air, absorb water from the soil, and use the energy of sunlight to perform photosynthesis, manufacturing all their own carbon sugars. On the other end of the spectrum, you have heterotrophs. Humans, animals, and fungi are heterotrophs.
Because we have to eat things.
We cannot photosynthesize. We must consume other organisms or the decaying matter of other organisms to acquire our carbon. A mixotroph is a rare organism that has evolved to do both simultaneously.
Okay, so it photosynthesizes, but it also eats.
The vanilla orchid is green. It has leaves. It is absolutely performing photosynthesis in that dappled sunlight. But the Mesoamerican jungle soil is notoriously shallow and nutrient poor.
Some needs more energy.
To survive and generate the massive amount of biological energy required to grow those huge, chemically dense pods, photosynthesis alone is not enough. The vanilla orchid forms a secret symbiotic relationship with mycorrhizal fungi living in the decaying mulch we talked about earlier.
Oh, wow.
The orchid's roots interface directly with the fungal network. It is photosynthesizing above ground, but below ground, it is actively extracting or essentially eating carbon and complex nutrients directly from the soil fungi. It relies on the fungal network as a secondary subterranean life support system.
So the demanding diva orchid is secretly snacking on fungi in the dark. That completely recontextualizes the agronomy rules from earlier. No wonder the guides are so terrified of a farmer stepping on the roots. You aren't just crushing the plant's water supply. You are physically crushing the invisible, subterranean fungal food supply line that the plant relies on to build its pods.
Which would kill it immediately.
Okay, but let's navigate back to the flavor profile. We have an 8-month-old, fully mature green pod hanging on the vine. It is packed full of glucovanillin, which we know is a locked chemical safe. It still doesn't taste or smell like vanilla. How do we break the safe open?
The safe is broken through a highly intensive, highly stressful traditional curing process that takes place after the harvest. The entire goal of curing is to subject the green pod to controlled physical trauma.
Sounds intense.
It is. This trauma activates the pod's own internal defense enzymes, specifically beta-glucosidases. These enzymes are the biological keys that cleave the chemical bonds, stripping the inert sugar molecule away from the glucoside and finally releasing the volatile aglycone,
which is the free vanillin molecule that we can actually smell and taste. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because reading the step-by-step curing guides, it sounds less like farming and more like a medieval chemical crucible.
That's a very apt comparison.
The closest analogy I can think of is the culinary art of dry aging a massive prime cut of beef, or the meticulous barrel aging of a complex wine. You're taking a raw product and using time, temperature, and controlled environmental stress to forcibly unlock the hidden code of its flavor.
There are 4 distinct mandatory steps in the traditional bourbon curing method utilized by the farmers in Madagascar. The first step is blanching. In the industry, this is bluntly referred to as killing the pod.
Right. As soon as the green pods are harvested, they are completely submerged into vats of hot water. The guides specify the temperature must be tightly controlled, usually hovering between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius.
And the pods are dunked for only a few minutes. The exact duration depends on the size of the beans.
The purpose here is highly specific, right? The heat is intense enough to rupture the cell walls and technically kill the living plant tissue, immediately stopping the pod from continuing any vegetative growth or rotting.
But 65 degrees is not hot enough to denature the crucial beta-glucosidase enzymes. The enzymes survive the heat shock.
Once the pods are blanched, they are rapidly moved to step 2, sweating. The farmers take these incredibly hot, wet, freshly killed beans and immediately wrap them tightly in heavy wool blankets.
These tightly swaddled bundles are then packed into insulated wooden sweat boxes for 48 hours.
They are intentionally trapped in a dark, intensely warm, hyperhumid environment.
This sweating phase is the critical thermal combination that unlocks the chemical safe. The surviving enzymes, hyperactivated by the retained heat and moisture, go to work on a cellular level.
They violently break down the chemical bonds of the glucovanillin,
releasing massive amounts of free vanillin into the tissue. This is the exact moment when the pod begins to physically transform, shifting from a bright, rigid green to that signature dark, pliable, chocolate brown color, and the aroma finally begins to emerge.
But the pod is still dripping wet from the sweating phase, which leads to step 3, drying. And because this is vanilla, the drying process cannot be simple or automated.
You can't just throw these beans into a commercial dehydrator or an industrial oven.
If you expose them to rapid high heat, those newly unlocked volatile essential oils will simply evaporate, ruining the flavor. So the farmers have to engage in a grueling daily cycle.
They take the blankets of sweating beans and lay the individual pods out on racks in the hot, direct tropical sun, but they only leave them there for a few hours at the peak of the day.
Before the pods can overheat, the workers must manually gather them all up and move them into the shade to slowly cool down.
They repeat this exhaustive rotation, sunshade, every single day for weeks.
They are slowly, meticulously drawing the water weight out of the pod while ensuring the volatile flavor compounds remain trapped in the oily flesh.
And once the moisture content dropped to the precise required level, usually around 25 to 30%, they enter the final phase, aging.
The dried, deeply fragrant beans are sorted by size and quality, bundled together, and placed into airtight containers.
These are traditionally large wooden boxes lined with wax paper to prevent any remaining moisture from escaping or external odors from entering.
The boxes are stored in a cool, dark, temperature-controlled facility for a minimum of 1 month, though premium beans are often aged much longer.
This aging period is a period of chemical marriage. Vanilla flavor is not just vanillin. There are over 200 distinct volatile flavor compounds, acids, ethers, alcohols, and phenols that have been unlocked during the curing process.
The aging phase allows this incredibly complex profile to stabilize, mellow, and meld together into the deep, rich aroma we recognize.
And the Leiden University metabolomics study actually quantified the chemical success of this grueling process.
By analyzing the pods before and after curing, they proved that by the end of the aging phase, free vanillin, the actual unbound flavor molecule that interfaces with our olfactory receptors, makes up roughly 24% of the total vanillin content available in the bean.
It is a phenomenal chemical transformation.
But I want to take a step back and look at the timeline we have just meticulously laid out. A farmer prepares the land and plants a vine. It takes up to 3 years for that vine to mature enough to produce a flower.
The farmer then has a terrifying 12-hour window to hand-pollinate that flower.
It then takes 9 to 10 months for the pod to slowly grow and reach maturity. Then, after harvesting, it takes weeks of blanching, sweating, and drying, followed by months of aging before that pod is considered a finished product.
It's an immense amount of time.
If it takes years to grow the infrastructure and almost a full year to grow and cure the fruit, how on earth does a farmer or an agricultural company afford to keep the lights on and stay in business while they wait for a paycheck?
That is the multi-million-dollar question at the heart of the industry. And it leads us directly away from the romanticism of botany and chemistry into the brutal, harsh financial realities of vanilla cultivation.
It's all about the money now.
Because of the extreme climate constraints we discussed, the absolute reliance on intense manual labor for pollination, and that immense unyielding time delay before a single bean is ready for the global market, vanilla farming is a terrifying economic tightrope walk.
It is an industry defined by massive upfront risk.
Exactly.
To understand this risk, we gained access to some fascinating, highly detailed financial modeling. This model was specifically designed for an agricultural startup looking to break into commercial vanilla farming in the year 2026.
And the numbers laid out in these spreadsheets are staggering.
Just to establish a baseline, a 1-hectare vanilla farm, which is a relatively small footprint, roughly 2.5 acres, the model projects a required startup budget hovering between $800,000 and $1 million.
And it is crucial to dissect where that capital is going. The vast majority of that $1 million budget is consumed immediately by upfront capital expenditure, or CapEx.
Right, and the immediate assumption might be that acquiring the land is the barrier to entry. But according to the model, purchasing 1 hectare of suitable cultivatable land in a tropical zone is only budgeted at roughly $50,000.
The land is cheap.
It is the infrastructure required to force the land to accommodate the diva orchid that drains the capital. If you aren't relying on the natural canopy of the Sava region, you have to build a highly specialized, heavy-duty greenhouse.
This structure requires advanced climate control systems to artificially mimic that perfect 50% dappled shade and maintain the 85% ambient humidity regardless of what the weather outside is doing.
The construction of that single 1-hectare greenhouse alone devours $300,000 of the budget.
And the infrastructure spending doesn't stop at the greenhouse. The financial model emphasizes that you cannot afford a bottleneck in post-harvest processing.
If you successfully grow a massive crop but cannot process it, it rots.
To ensure the farm produces grade A premium beans, the startup must invest $150,000 in specialized, high-capacity blanching vats, drying racks, and secure holding equipment.
Then you have to factor in the life support systems. The model allocates $40,000 for a commercial irrigation and nutrient delivery system.
Because remember, if the water pressure drops, the humidity plummets, the plant's stomata close, it enters drought stress, and it drops all its flowers, destroying the year's revenue.
And finally, you have to actually purchase the core biological asset, the initial vanilla planifolia cuttings, to populate the greenhouse, which costs another $100,000.
So if we tally that up, before the farm has planted a single vine in the ground, before a single leaf has grown, the founders have burned through well over $500,000 in pure capex.
The infrastructure weight is massive. But the real financial terror, the metric that keeps investors awake at night, lies in the labor constraints and the waiting period.
Yes, because as we established with Edmund Albius, you cannot deploy drones or automated machines to pollinate the flowers. You cannot use a combine harvester to collect the pods.
Every flower requires a human hand. The financial model explicitly budgets for 40 full-time employees just to manage that single 1-hectare plot.
You need a highly skilled farm manager, budgeted at $90,000, an operations manager at $80,000, and a dedicated team of workers to handle the daily maintenance and the intense pollination windows.
The annual payroll for this small farm sits at $295,000. And human beings require their paychecks every single month, regardless of whether the orchids are blooming.
This specific dynamic introduces the concept of the working capital hold, which is the most critical metric in the entire model.
How does that work?
Well, in a standard manufacturing business, the cycle is tight. You purchase raw materials, you manufacture a product in a week, you sell it, and the immediate revenue covers your ongoing operational expenses. But in the vanilla industry, from the day you plant the first cutting, you face a mandatory 39-month waiting period before you receive a single dollar of revenue from selling a cured, finished bean.
39 months. You are essentially paying salaries and utility bills for over 3 years before you possess a viable product to take to the market.
To quantify that pressure, the financial model calculates the farm's monthly burn rate. When you combine the massive payroll with the estimated $14,000 a month in fixed overhead, which includes commercial agricultural insurance, the heavy utility costs of running the climate control systems in the greenhouse, and facility maintenance, the farm is actively burning $38,583 every single month.
It sounds exactly like the financial profile of a high-risk Silicon Valley tech startup. You are burning nearly $40,000 a month for 3 consecutive years before releasing your beta product.
But instead of a team of software engineers writing code in an air-conditioned office in Palo Alto, you are standing out in the tropical dirt, babysitting a greenhouse full of temperamental orchids.
Praying that a fungal infection doesn't sweep through the mulch beds and hoping it doesn't rain too hard on pollination day.
It is an incredibly fragile, high-stakes venture. The financial model coldly concludes that a startup farm requires a bare minimum cash buffer of over $230,000 just to survive the initial operational runway.
But realistically,
To fully cover that brutal 39-month cycle without relying on high-interest early debt or panicking during a bad weather month, the founders need to secure a working capital reserve pushing toward $1.2 million on top of the capex.
and this insane economic pressure, the barrier to entry, the risk of crop failure, the labor costs is exactly why the global flavor industry looks the way it does today. Natural vanilla is so outrageously expensive to produce, carries such massive environmental risk, and takes so excruciatingly long to reach the market that it physically cannot scale to meet global consumer demand.
Not even remotely close. The statistics are jarring. The global industrial demand for vanillin, the primary flavor compound used in everything from mass-market ice cream to perfumes and pharmaceuticals, is roughly 12,000 tons every single year.
And how much of that is real vanilla?
Of that massive global volume, less than 1% is derived from actual vanilla pods.
That is a staggering statistic. Less than 1% of the vanilla flavor in the world comes from a plant.
The remaining 99% is synthetic vanillin. Because the chemical structure of vanillin is well understood, the flavor industry has spent decades perfecting ways to manufacture it artificially.
Where do they get it from?
It is predominantly synthesized in massive industrial laboratories from petrochemical precursors, specifically a compound called guaiacol. Other methods synthesize it from lignin, which is a structural polymer found in wood pulp, essentially utilizing paper industry byproducts.
And when you look at the economics, the dominance of synthetic vanillin makes absolute sense. Producing a kilogram of synthetic vanillin in a lab costs less than $15.
Meanwhile, the price of natural vanilla is at the mercy of the Malagasy climate and geopolitical stability. Depending on the year and the crop yield in Madagascar, the wholesale price of natural cured vanilla fluctuates wildly, routinely landing anywhere between $1,200 and $4,000 per kilogram.
It is an unbelievable price gap, $15 versus $4,000. And while synthetic vanillin provides that baseline recognizable flavor, it completely lacks the other 199 complex organic compounds generated during the curing process, which is why high-end chefs and perfumers still demand the natural product.
Right, they need the complexity.
So, looking at this terrifying landscape, if you are an innovative grower staring down these massive environmental risks and the crushing financial weight of a 39-month runway, how do you mitigate that?
Yeah.
How do you hack a system that seems biologically rigged against you?
The modern agricultural answer is radical but logical. You remove the plant from the unpredictability of nature entirely.
You take it inside.
To survive the economics and guarantee a yield, modern horticulture is literally pulling vanilla out of the Mesoamerican and Malagasy rainforests and locking it inside highly controlled, technologically advanced environments.
This brings us to the final section of our sources, exploring controlled environment agriculture, commonly referred to as CEA. According to reports from Urban Ag News and detailed plans from horticulture engineers, innovative Dutch growers, as well as high-tech farmers in places like French Polynesia, are moving commercial vanilla cultivation completely indoors into massive plastic-skinned greenhouses.
It represents a fascinating paradigm shift in agronomy. They are abandoning the traditional wooden tutors and primary forest canopies. Instead, they are constructing vast, light-gauge steel structures.
These facilities are governed by advanced climate computers that constantly monitor external weather and internal conditions.
They manage the light transmission perfectly, deploying automated, motorized shading screens that track the sun to ensure the orchids never get scorched by a direct ray of light, while guaranteeing they absorb exactly enough photosynthetic energy to thrive.
And the most shocking part to me was that they aren't even using soil anymore. The raised mulch beds and the worries about slope gradients are gone. They are planting the vanilla vines directly into pure coconut husk substrates.
The coconut core is significantly lighter than soil, it drains water flawlessly, and most importantly, it is sterile. It completely removes the risk of native, soil-borne fungal diseases rotting those fragile root systems.
By tightly controlling the physical architecture, they are packing these modern greenhouses incredibly tight, achieving a planting density of 20 lianas or vines per square meter, vastly outperforming traditional jungle yields.
But the real hack, the true innovation that allows these high-tech farms to solve that brutal 39-month financial bottleneck is biological manipulation.
In the wild, or in the traditional farms of Madagascar, the vanilla planifolia plant generally flowers only once a year. Its reproductive cycle triggered by the onset of the natural dry season. The plant senses the environmental shift and pushes out flowers.
But in a fully enclosed CEA greenhouse, you control the rain.
Right. The horticulture sources explain this incredible biological trigger. By a perfectly timing water stress, essentially shutting off the irrigation and deliberately withholding water from the orchids for 45 to 60 days, the growers artificially induce drought stress.
The plant begins to panic, sensing that its environment is failing. Its biological imperative is survival of the species, so it triggers an emergency reproductive cycle, pushing out a massive bloom of flowers before it dies.
But because the growers control the water, the plant isn't actually dying. And because they aren't at the mercy of a single, massive, natural rainy season, they can stagger this artificial drought stress across different physical zones inside the greenhouse.
The result of this targeted stress manipulation is what the industry calls constant monthly flowering. Because the growers dictate the biological triggers zone by zone, they create a perpetual cycle.
In one aisle of the greenhouse, flowers are blooming and being pollinated. In the next aisle, pods are actively growing. In another, mature beans are being harvested. All of this is happening year-round on the exact same farm.
That is a massive paradigm shift for the financial model. Instead of paying 40 employees for an entire year to wait for one giant harvest in the fall and praying a tropical cyclone doesn't hit the coast the week before picking, you have established a steady, predictable, year-round harvest.
This continuous cash flow fundamentally stabilizes the business, and the yields are staggering. The CEA growers are recording yields of up to 4 kilograms of cured vanilla per individual tutor unit.
And in French Polynesia, growers are combining this environmental control with genetic advantages. They are heavily leveraging a specific hybrid variety of the plant to make the entire post-harvest process far more efficient.
Right. They cultivate a species called Vanilla tahitensis, commonly known as Tahitian vanilla. It is a natural genetic cross between the traditional vanilla planifolia and another species, Vanilla odorata.
I spent a lot of time reading about the Tahitian hybrid, and the key botanical difference lies in the anatomy of the pod as it matures. With the standard vanilla planifolia grown in Madagascar, there is a major flaw. If the pod is left on the vine until it is fully biologically ripe, the tip of the bean physically splits open.
When it splits, the interior oxidizes, the volatile oils escape, and the commercial quality is completely ruined.
That threat of splitting is precisely why Malagasy farmers are forced to harvest the pods while they are still entirely green and flavorless, necessitating that massive, months-long, labor-intensive curing process of blanching and sweating just to stop the biological clock.
But the Tahitian vanilla pod possesses a structural mutation. It does not split.
Exactly. Because the structural integrity of the pod remains intact, the French Polynesian farmers can simply leave the pod attached to the vine until it achieves full natural maturity. The pod literally turns black, fleshy, and highly aromatic right there on the plant, dramatically reducing the need for aggressive thermal curing.
Which fundamentally alters its chemical profile. Giving the Tahitian vanilla that completely different, highly prized flavor, the culinary sources describe it as having very distinct floral notes of anise and deep caramel compared to the heavier, woody, traditional bourbon vanilla profile.
So what does this all mean? We're looking at a massive, somewhat paradoxical intersection of nature and human technology.
We are currently building million-dollar, high-tech, climate-controlled steel and plastic bubbles just to flawlessly mimic the exact temperature, humidity, and dappled shade of the natural floor of a Mesoamerican jungle. Also, we can guarantee a steady, risk-free supply of flavor for our milkshakes and cookies.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it serves as a perfect, tangible example of how intense agricultural technology is stepping in to try and salvage a legacy crop. Global climate change is aggressively shifting weather patterns.
It is altering the predictability of the rainy seasons and increasing the frequency and violence of extreme weather events, like the cyclones that regularly devastate the Sava region in Madagascar.
The narrow, perfect, natural environment that the vanilla orchid absolutely relies on is rapidly becoming unstable. These massive, controlled indoor environments might ultimately represent the only viable way to secure the global supply chain of natural vanilla for future generations.
It has been an absolutely unbelievable journey through these sources today. We started by examining a diva orchid that demands near impossible growing conditions, surviving in the wild only by secretly feeding on subterranean soil fungi.
We explored the incredible intellect of a 12-year-old boy, Edmund Albius, who bypassed millions of years of evolutionary defense mechanisms and unlocked a multi-million-dollar global industry using nothing but his thumb and a tiny blade of grass.
We dive deep into the intense organic chemistry of a months-long curing process designed to crack open a cellular safe. We charted the terrifying economics of a million-dollar startup burning cash for 39 straight months.
And finally, we looked at the high-tech, computer-controlled coconut husk greenhouses that represent the future of the flavor.
It is a narrative that completely changes how you perceive a simple, mundane bottle of vanilla extract sitting in your pantry.
It really does. It is impossible to look at it as plain ever again.
And to honor that complexity, we have a very specific actionable note for you, the listener. The next time you're in the kitchen preparing to bake, take a brief second to honor Edmund Albius and the insane years-long journey that little dark liquid took to reach your measuring spoon.
In fact, our source from the Des Moines Botanical Garden provided a highly specific, small-batch chocolate chip cookie recipe explicitly designed to celebrate Albius's contribution.
We highly recommend you try it, not just for the taste, but for the process.
It is a remarkably precise recipe, mirroring the strict demands of growing the orchid itself.
Exactly. The Botanical Garden doesn't just throw ingredients together. The recipe demands precision. Creaming exactly a quarter cup of softened butter with a quarter cup of brown sugar and 2 tablespoons of white sugar.
You incorporate 1 egg yolk and exactly half a teaspoon of pure, high-quality, natural vanilla extract.
You gently stir in a half cup plus 1 tablespoon of flour, a quarter teaspoon of salt, and a quarter teaspoon of baking soda before folding in a quarter cup of chocolate chips.
But here is where the recipe mimics the agricultural demands.
Yeah.
You cannot just throw them in the oven.
The Botanical Garden mandates that you must tightly control the environment of the dough. You must freeze the dough for exactly 10 minutes before baking. If you skip this step, the cookies spread out and lose their structural integrity.
Only after that environmental control is complete do you bake them at 350 degrees for 9 to 11 minutes.
But as you carefully measure that extract and bake those cookies, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on.
Earlier, we discussed how the metabolomics study from Leiden University revealed the presence of homocitric acid, proving that the wild vanilla orchid relies on a secret mixotrophic relationship.
It physically requires a symbiotic partnership with invisible soil fungi to extract carbon and thrive in its natural habitat.
But as we move the future of commercial vanilla cultivation indoors,
hmm
locking it into sterile, high-tech, climate-controlled, soilless coconut husk greenhouses to maximize our financial yields and protect our investments from an unpredictable climate, are we stripping away the unseen, wild partnerships that made the plant so chemically complex in the first place?
Oh, that is a profound point. We are removing the fungi entirely from the equation.
Yes, we are optimizing the plant's physical environment, but we are isolating it from its biological community. Could the ultimate future of producing the perfect natural vanilla flavor rely not on isolating the plant inside a sterile clean room, but on learning how to actively cultivate and farm the invisible fungal networks it evolved to talk to?
It is a question of whether true flavor is a product of isolated genetics or the result of a chaotic wild ecosystem. Something for you to think about while you enjoy that warm vanilla flavor.
That is a phenomenal question to end on. In our pursuit of ultimate agricultural control, are we engineering the biological soul out of the flavor?
I absolutely love that perspective. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the wildly complex world of the world's most plain flavor. We'll catch you on the next one.